Every night at roughly the same hour, the keeper wrote the same line in his logbook. Vessel sighted, anchored offshore, departed before dawn. He wrote it in fair weather and in storms that flattened the dunes. He wrote it on nights so still the sea looked like glass. For 6 years, the same ship arrived and left, and he recorded every single visit in the official log. There was only one problem with that. The ship he was describing, down to its name, its rigging, its single guttering light, had already sunk. It went down with all hands in 1928, and he kept logging it anyway. Start with the coastline, a narrow spit of rock somewhere along the cold edge of the North Sea, where the water turns the color of slate by mid-afternoon and stays that way until spring. This is the kind of place lighthouses were built for, not to be beautiful but to keep men alive. The keeper here lived alone for most of the year, relieved only occasionally, supplied by boat, his entire job reduced to one task. Watch the sea, record what you see. The logbook was a legal document. Arrivals, departures, weather, anything unusual. Keepers were trained to write only what they could verify. No speculation, no stories, just the facts in ink, dated and signed. So when the first entry appeared, a vessel sighted offshore at dusk, anchored, gone by morning, there was nothing strange about it at all. Ships passed all the time. They sheltered in the lee of the rocks. They waited out the weather. It was the most ordinary line a keeper could write. What made it strange was not the first night. It was the second and the third. And every night after that, for years, the same ship in the same place, never coming closer, never sending word. Here is where the story turns, and turns hard, because someone eventually checked. When the logs were reviewed, and we'll get to who reviewed them, the vessel the keeper kept describing was identified. The rigging matched. The silhouette matched. The single dim light, he noted again and again, matched a lamp that hung from a specific part of the ship. And that ship had a record. It had sailed that coast for years. It had a name, a crew, a home port. It had also, according to every maritime registry that mattered, broken apart on the rocks in 1928 and sunk with everyone aboard. Read that again. The keeper was not describing a similar ship. He was describing a specific vessel that no longer existed, that had not existed for years before his first entry. He had never seen it afloat in his life. He could not have known its details from memory, because he arrived at the station after it sank. And yet there it was in his hand, in the log, night after night. The dead ship, arriving on schedule, anchoring in the dark, and slipping away before anyone else could wake to see it. The official record said the ship was gone. The official log said it came back every night. Now the reasonable explanation arrives, and we owe it our full attention. Lighthouse keeping was one of the loneliest jobs ever invented. Men spent months in near total isolation, speaking to no one, watching a horizon that rarely changed. Psychologists have a name for what prolonged solitude does to perception. The mind, starved of input, begins to manufacture its own. Keepers across history reported hearing voices in the wind, seeing figures on the gallery, watching ships that the relief crew never found. It is entirely possible this keeper was simply unwell, that the same hallucination repeated itself, night after night, and his trained hand wrote it down out of pure habit. That is the rational answer. But it has a problem, and the problem is the detail. A hallucination born of loneliness should drift. It should change shape, change ship, change story. This one never did. For 6 years it was the same vessel, the same anchorage, the same departure before dawn, described with the consistency of a man recording a fact, not inventing a dream. And there is one more wrinkle the rational explanation cannot quite swallow. On at least one occasion, the keeper was not the only person at the station. Someone else looked out at the sea that night. And the next morning the log had a second signature beneath the entry. To understand why sailors took this seriously, why no one simply laughed it off, you have to understand what the sea already believed. The most famous ghost ship in human history is the Flying Dutchman. The Dutch called it de Vliegende Hollander. According to the legend, it is a vessel doomed never to make port, condemned to sail the oceans forever, unable to reach the land it can always see. The myth grew out of the 17th century golden age of the Dutch East India Company, when Dutch maritime power ruled the trade routes and the seas swallowed ships by the hundred. The oldest surviving version of the legend dates to the late 18th century, and the details matter here. According to the lore, if the Flying Dutchman is hailed by another ship, its crew might try to send messages to land, or to people long dead. Reported sightings through the 19th and 20th centuries described the same thing every time. The ship glowed with a ghostly light. To see it was a portent of doom. It was believed to be a 17th century Dutch cargo ship, a flight. Now hold that image, a doomed vessel, glowing faintly, trying to reach a shore it can never touch, against a lighthouse log that records a single dim light arriving every night and never coming in. There is a reason ghost ship stories cling to certain waters, and the North Sea is one of them. This is some of the most lethal coastline in the world. The currents are merciless, the fog comes without warning, and the rocks have killed sailors for 1,000 years. And in the decades on either side of our story, the sea here became something worse, a battlefield. Consider the scale of what these waters would later hold. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who commanded Germany's U-boat fleet and briefly succeeded Hitler as head of state in 1945, sent his submarines into these northern seas in their hundreds. By the end of the Second World War, 648 U-boats had been lost. 429 of them went down with no survivors. 215 were lost on their very first patrol. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served aboard them, around 30,000 never came home. The sea our keeper watched would, within a generation, become a graveyard on a scale almost impossible to picture. So when a lonely man on a rock writes that a sunken ship comes back every night, you have to remember where he is sitting. He is sitting above a sea that does not let go of its dead easily. And his story was about to reach the people who kept the records. Eventually, the logs left the lighthouse. They always did. They were collected, filed, reviewed by the maritime authority responsible for the station. And somewhere in that chain, someone read 6 years of entries describing a ship that the same authority had officially listed as lost in 1928. Imagine being that clerk. You are cross-checking a routine log against the registry of vessels, and the line you are reading should not exist. The reaction, as far as anyone can reconstruct it, was not fear. It was bureaucratic discomfort. A keeper who logs a phantom is a keeper who may be unfit for duty. A station that records impossible arrivals is a station that cannot be trusted to record real ones. The danger of a man like this is not that he sees ghosts. It is that the next ship in distress might be real and no one would believe his log. And yet the entries were too precise, too consistent, too disciplined to be the work of a broken mind. So the file did what files do with things that cannot be explained. It went quiet. The keeper's later years are poorly documented. The log itself became one of those objects that surfaces in maritime archives and footnotes, cited, doubted, and never resolved. But there is one entry left to tell you about, 6 years of the same line. Vessel sighted, anchored, departed before dawn, and then one night the entry changed. According to the account, the keeper wrote that the ship did not depart. For the first time in 6 years, dawn came and the vessel was still there, closer now, he noted, than it had ever anchored before. And then nothing. The nightly entries stopped. Not gradually, completely. The ship that had arrived every single night for 6 years simply never appeared in the log again. The legend of the Flying Dutchman says the doomed crew is forever trying to reach a shore they can never touch, sending messages to the living and to people long dead. For 6 years, something offshore had arrived, waited, and turned back before morning, as if it could never quite come in. And then, on one final night, it came closer than ever. What we are left with is a logbook full of impossible entries, written in a careful, sober hand by a man trained to record only what was true. He told us a sunken ship came back every night. He told us, finally, that one night it stopped going home. And the question that survives all of it, the one no archive has ever answered, is the simplest one of all. If he was hallucinating, what was it that finally stayed? A sunken ship, logged every night for 6 years by a man who never saw it sail. The records are real. The explanation isn't. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something the sea never gave back. So here's my question for you. Do you believe the keeper saw something, or only what isolation built in his mind? Tell me below. And if you want the stories the mainstream leaves out, subscribe to Obscura Files. The horizon is never as empty as it looks.